Wyoming PBS and the Sheridan Press present the Wyoming U.S. Senate Debate 2018, live from Whitney Center for the Arts at Sheridan College. Funding for this program is provided by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
Good evening and welcome to the Wyoming 2018 General Election U.S. Senate Debate, live from the beautiful Whitney Center for the Performing Arts here at Sheridan College. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. We welcome our viewers tonight who are watching us live on Wyoming PBS, watching our live streams on social media, and to those of you who are watching tonight on C-SPAN, welcome also.
And I'm Kristen Saban for the Sheridan Press. We're pleased to co-host this Wyoming U.S. Senate debate with Wyoming PBS and Sheridan College here on the beautiful Sheridan College campus. Two of the three candidates for Wyoming's open U.S. Senate seat are here with us this evening. We will hear from Republican John Barrasso and Democrat Gary Trauner. Libertarian candidate Joseph Parambo was also invited to tonight's debate but could not attend. Now, please join me in welcoming the two candidates participating in tonight's debate, Republican John Barrasso and Democrat Gary Trauner.
Hey, guys.
Thank you.
Both candidates have been briefed on the ground rules for tonight's debate, and the order that the candidates are appearing before you was chosen randomly just moments ago. Also, both candidates, in light of current national events, have agreed tonight to refrain from inflammatory, personal, or political attacks and to focus on the issues. And to both candidates, thank you so much for your willingness to do that.
You bet.
Both Kristen and me and the candidates here tonight encourage you to vote on Election Day. That's coming up on Tuesday, November 6th. The first question, in lieu of opening statements, has been provided to the candidates this evening, but the questions that follow have not been seen by the candidates. We want to get right to our debate, so if the candidates are ready, let's begin. Senator Barrasso, why are you the most qualified to serve Wyoming?
Well, first, let me thank the Sheridan Press and certainly Wyoming Public Television, Sheridan College, and everyone who's here tonight. In terms of my qualifications, I think it has to do with my background as a physician, as a state senator, and as a volunteer in our state. Someone who learned to listen to people and then act in the best interest of the people of Wyoming. And then as a United States Senator, following the code of the West, live each day with courage, take pride in your work, do what needs to be done. And what needed to be done, and we've been able to do over the last 2 years, is focus on jobs and the economy and paychecks and prosperity by cutting taxes and letting people keep more of their hard-earned money, by giving people more freedom, by getting rid of regulations, and by unleashing Wyoming and American energy. Also, I passed a law that allowed Wyoming to get back hundreds of millions of dollars that had been taken from us by Washington. So I'm proud of my record in fighting for the people of Wyoming, and I stand by it.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trauner.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So who am I? I'm a family man who has leadership experience in education. I've been chair of the school board. I've got leadership experience in infrastructure. I've been chair of a water and sewer district. I've got leadership experience in healthcare. I was the COO of a regional medical center. I've got leadership experience in the private sector. I've started and run several businesses in Wyoming. And I've got a reputation for results through leadership and integrity and working with everyone and anyone to get stuff done, especially in dysfunctional situations. Who am I not? I'm a husband and father who's not a career politician, and I have no ties to any political party hierarchy. I'm not beholden to any corporate donors, so I'm truly about the people of Wyoming. And I'm not someone who relies on fear and division to get ahead and keep power. Leadership and experience are only as good as how you use it. If you're not using it to help the people you are elected to represent, that's not the kind of experience and leadership that Wyoming and the United States needs. I've succeeded because of who I am and because of who I'm not. True leadership and integrity are in short supply in Washington, D.C., and I've got what it takes to best represent Wyoming in the U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. First question tonight, then, will come from Kristen.
Do you believe that the incendiary rhetoric of today's political climate is hindering the ability of the country to actively and civilly engage in our government?
Well, I think it's a big problem what we're seeing happening out there right now, and it is about civility, because it's not an issue of bipartisanship, because we're passing bipartisan legislation. I was with the President Tuesday in the White House, Democrat senators, Republican senators. He signed a bill that passed through the Senate 99-1, so it's not about that. We need to tone down the rhetoric, but also, absolutely, from a standpoint of civility, we can do much better. But these are criminal acts. And the front page of the Laramie paper today talks about the arrest of somebody in Laramie who had broken into a Republican headquarters, set a fire. There were people sleeping upstairs who could have been harmed or killed. We hear about the bombs that have come off. Those people who ever have done those things have to be found and prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Mr. Trauner?
Clearly the incendiary rhetoric is absolutely something that's not great for our country. I mean, I go on social media, we do a lot of stuff on social media, and it's incredible the attacks, the personal attacks, and the virulent attacks that we see out there. Those people who know I've been running for a year now know that I'm all about country before party. I think that what we've got right now are parties and people that want to make sure that they like fear and division. Career politicians and political pundits want to use fear and division to divide us because it suits their purpose. It keeps them in power, it pays their bills in corporate media, and that's something that we really need to work on and change. I think what we need to do is make sure that we've got people who are running for office and elected to office who are willing to do the right thing for the country instead of before party. George Washington, in his farewell address in 1796, his biggest fear was putting party before country would corrupt our system. And unfortunately, I think in the leadership in D.C., we've got that today.
Mr. Brasso, you have an additional 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. Only to, my opponent talked about the issue of social media. I'll tell you, I stay off of social media for the same purposes that the kind of attacks that are virulent, that are out there. Most of the senators that I talk to try to avoid it because of the attacks that are there that are so personal.
Thank you. The next question for Mr. Trauner from Kristen.
Okay. This question is actually directly from a Sheridan College student. Most theaters of higher education cost inordinate amounts of money and set people up for lifetimes of debt. What are your thoughts on the availability and affordability of higher education, and what solutions could be put into place to support your stance?
So it hasn't always been that way, and I think we have to take a look at consumer debt. So over the last 30 years or so, consumer debt, student loans were no greater than mortgages or home equity loans or car loans. But if you look over the last 30 years, all other consumer debt has stayed flat, and student loans have soared through the roof. They now account for more debt on the consumer front than everything else combined. We need to change that. So there's a couple of things I think that we need to do. First of all, 1862, the United States gave land-grant universities the power to affordably teach people and educate them on agricultural and technological and other factors. We need to keep that type of education affordable. We need to make sure that community colleges and vocational schools are affordable. So from the federal level, Pell Grants, Perkins Grants, things that can incentivize students and help them to get affordable education without going to $37,000 of debt. I think that's the average level of student debt. We absolutely need to change that. But here's a couple of things. Why is it that students who have student loans can't refinance their loans when anybody else with a loan can in the commercial sector? Why can't students discharge their loans in bankruptcy when everybody else who has a mortgage or another type of commercial loan can do that in bankruptcy? It's because corporate PACs and corporate money has bought our politicians in Washington, D.C., and they're doing the work for those folks instead of doing the work for regular students and people back home. We need to change that.
Senator Brasso.
Well, number one, I talked about this at Kelly Walsh High School on Thursday, at the University of Wyoming on Friday. And the fact is that here in Wyoming, we have something called the Hathaway Scholarship. No other state in the country has anything like this. Every student in Wyoming in high school, parents all know about this, and high school students all know about this, know that if they keep their grades up and stay out of trouble, they don't have to compete against other students for those scholarships. Every student in Wyoming can earn it. Why are we this way? Because of the energy resources that we have as a state. We had a lot of money coming in. I was in the state Senate at the time. 4 of us got together, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, came up with the idea of the Hathaway Scholarship. The first time we tried it, it actually failed because it only focused on the University of Wyoming. The second time around, we included the community colleges, and then it passed. The University of Wyoming has been named number 3 in the country in terms of value for the buck. The quality of education, the kind of jobs people get, we are blessed in Wyoming like no other.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trauner.
I appreciate what John says he does and said he did in the state Senate, but let's be clear, Hathaway scholarships are state-level scholarships. At the federal level, we need to make sure that we pass laws so that we don't have unconscionable corporations making sure that our students are in permanent debt and can't get out. We need to make sure that you can refinance your loans when you have the opportunity and rates go down, and we need to make sure that we don't charge incredible interest rates in an environment where it's not required.
Senator Brasso, what's your current view of main streets and downtowns in Wyoming? Can you say today that their outlook is healthy and one of promise? Or, if not, what would you do to change that?
Well, I think there is, since the election of President Trump, since the tax cuts, since the regulatory relief, and the fact that unemployment is so low in Wyoming, as I travel the state, there is a confidence and an optimism and a positiveness that I see all over the state. Visit with small businesses routinely, have here in Sheridan, do just around the state, and I think there is just a new confidence and optimism all around the state of Wyoming as more and more people are hiring. They're looking for folks to work. They're paying higher wages. People are taking home more money. I just think that things are really looking up in Wyoming. We have a strong, healthy economy and a growing economy.
Mr. Trauner.
You know, I think I find that really interesting. We must be traveling around in different states. Because when I travel around the state, we're coming out of a bus, and people are sort of cautiously thinking that things might be getting better. But for the average worker, nothing's changed. That tax cut, since that tax cut, average working wages have actually gone down, not up. That tax cut was also geared towards large corporations and wealthy heirs. 85% of the benefits went to them on a permanent basis. The rest were temporary, and we blew an additional $2 trillion hole in our debt in order to do that. But as I go around the state, and it's interesting, I visit a lot of businesses where they tell me they've never seen a candidate or an official for U.S. Senate or U.S. House come to their business before, and it amazes me. I'm like, how can you make policy if you don't know what's going on in your communities? When I go into Wyoming's communities, some of them are thriving, some of them are not. But for regular working people, it's not getting done. Nothing's changed for them. I talk to people at the girls' school, and they tell me they haven't had a raise in 5 or 6 years. I hear that all over the place.
Senator?
Well, when I visited VacuTech here in Sheridan, their biggest concern was affordable housing. They have jobs. They're trying to hire people who can't find housing here in Sheridan. The tax cuts, as I talk to people all around Wyoming, they say, maybe $2,000 more they're able to hold. They realize there's a child tax credit. They're going to have double the standard deduction. There are good news all around. Over the next 10 years, $20,000 extra in their pocket. That's what and all of the bonus that have been paid by so many businesses. I think about 4,000 or 5,000 workers in Wyoming have received bonuses.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trauner, the federal government is projected to add about $985 billion to the federal deficit in this coming year, in fiscal year 2019. Why should Wyomingites care?
Because we're mortgaging our future. So this recent tax cut that we just did, like to use a little example. My son, Ben, is in the audience out there somewhere I can't see. And he's older now, but you know what? I use the example of I could give my kids a higher allowance, okay, and ask them to go get an extra milkshake or maybe in Ben's case an extra video game every week. And they could do that and they could get instant gratification. But, 5 years down the road, if I look at them and tell them, sorry, guys, you can't go to college because we just took all that money out of your college fund, that's what we're doing in the United States government today. We gave instant gratification on a temporary basis to individuals. We gave the wealthiest corporations in the world and wealthy heirs permanent tax cuts who didn't need it, and we blew $2 trillion bigger hole in our debt. It matters because for the future of our children and their children's children, it's unsustainable. If you've come into office with $9 trillion of debt, and now we have $21 trillion of debt, I don't think you get to call yourself a fiscal conservative anymore. We need to fix things. We need to make sure we pay our bills as we can.
Again, we ask the audience to please refrain from applause until the end of the debate. Senator Barrasso.
Well, it's interesting. Under the tax cuts, actually, we have more people working, more people earning more money. So the money coming into the federal government has actually been higher this year than had been in the past. But you're absolutely right. The deficit is unsustainable. We cannot continue. I believe we need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We have not been able to get that passed, but you really need to grow the economy. And in my opinion, the way you grow the economy is you have to deal with irresponsible spending. You have to cut the spending. You have to deal with the tidal waves that are coming with us as baby boomers turn 65 and the impact that that's going to have on Social Security and on Medicare. And you need to grow the economy through the issues of trade, tax cuts, regulatory relief, the things that actually make the economy hum.
Mr. Trauner.
Let's be clear. Federal spending as a percentage of GDP is lower than it was in 1980, 38 years ago. It's not the spending side that the problem is. The problem is that we've foregone trillions of dollars, over $6 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans over the last 17 or 18 years in this misguided view that somehow trickle-down economics works. It doesn't. It's a fraud. We need to get away from that. Everyone's got to pay their fair share.
Thank you. Kristen.
Hey, Senator Barrasso. At a rally in Houston Monday night, President Trump embraced the term nationalist as a descriptor. What does that word mean to you, and would you similarly describe yourself?
Well, I believe in America first. I want to grow the American economy, and I want to be a senator for the state of Wyoming. We heard previously about the issue of education and the debt nationally and in national law, and he said, well, what I had done in the state Senate was for Wyoming. I was focused on Wyoming. I wanted to make sure for our students, they don't have the kind of debt that students from 49 other states have. With regard to what the President said, and I was with him in the Oval Office when that came up again on Tuesday, he was signing into law a bipartisan piece of legislation that I had authored, and the question was raised about that. I believe I'm an American first. I want to have a strong, healthy America. I want to make sure that we can, from one sense, intimidate others, our enemies, and in another sense, inspire others by the history that we have in this great country. So if that makes me a nationalist, fine, because I think we ought to use what we have in America to inspire the world to try to follow our lead and to intimidate our enemies to not try anything.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trauner.
I'm sorry. So I think I'm not a labels guy. I don't like labels. You know, patriot, nationalist, whatever, left, right, conservative, liberal. To me, it's about solutions and solving problems. I'm an American, and I want to do what's right for Wyoming, and I want to do what's right for our country. But look, we live in an interdependent world these days, right? Our trade policies are clearly interdependent. You know what? When you put tariffs in place, you don't realize that there's a whole supply chain for a whole bunch of American companies, and they're getting a lot of their stuff from out the rest of the world. And if you put tariffs in place, it impacts those companies and it raises prices. So this isn't a question of sort of putting a label, and I think labels are dangerous, in my view. So to me, this isn't about being a nationalist and saying, you know, America first. This is doing what's right for Wyoming and the country and making sure that in an interdependent world, we are working with our allies, right? We are negotiating with our enemies and being strong as well, but making sure that it's a world where we all can live safely and soundly for future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. Senator?
Well, in this interdependent world, I want to do what President Trump said with regard to energy. We have incredible amounts of energy resources here. You know, it used to be energy security, then energy independence, and now we're talking about energy dominance. We should not be dependent upon Saudi Arabia for energy. We need to be and are now the #1 oil producer in the world. We need to continue to use all of our energy resources as an economic and world power. You can get a lot more done with a barrel of oil than you can with a barrel of a gun.
Thank you, Senator. Kristen?
Okay. Mr. Trauner, this one starts with you. A Defense Department official said today that President Trump is preparing to order at least 800 U.S. troops to help secure the southern border. What is your take on the president's immigration policies?
You know, I think, well, let's just start with a couple different things. When it comes to DACA, I fully support Dreamers, and I support people that came here when they were young and should become American citizens and who have a vested interest in this country. That's #1. So I'll disagree with him on that one. I also think that ripping children away from their parents at the border is not who we are as Americans, and we need to not do that. When it comes to immigration policies, look, you can scare people and tell them that there's a caravan of a bunch of dirt-poor migrants who are really trying to get away from a hellish existence in the countries where they live. And, you know, they're 2,000 miles away from here right now. And by the time they get here, we as Americans can absolutely make sure that the ones who want asylum appropriately we can deal with, because it's not illegal to ask for asylum, and that the ones who we don't want here, we can certainly make sure that we have secure borders and they're turned away, right? But the way to do this is to work with the countries where they are, to handle the root causes of the problem, to make sure that people don't feel like they have to leave. Look, nobody leaves their country and their language and their family and their friends and their culture and everything to make an arduous 2,000-mile journey because they just want to do it for laughs, right? This is tough stuff, and we're giving them jobs. Here's the thing, right? If we don't want to give them jobs, if we don't want them coming here, let's go have ICE arrest the CEOs of the companies that illegally hire these workers against the law, and behavior will change really quickly.
Senator Brasso.
Well, we need to secure the border, we need to enforce the law, and we need to keep families together. But America will not be stampeded by people coming to this country, 5,000 trying to get here to break through and then get into this country. And I think the President is right to try to prevent that from happening, and I bet he will prevent that from happening. It's our job to enforce the law. We need to do things from a standpoint of immigration law. We need to do things in terms of ending this chain migration, ending this diversity lottery, using the wall certainly, but additional, the technology that you need to keep this secure. You need manpower there as well. And with regard to DACA, I think we have to deal with those people who were brought here as children, illegally, but to me it's all about illegal, bad, legal immigration, good, and for those children we need a solution, but to me that's not citizenship.
Mr. Trauner?
You know, I think calling a bunch of dirt-poor migrants that are moving at about 2 miles an hour a stampede is a little inflammatory, and that's not right, right? So I think we need to make sure that we realize these are human beings that are in a difficult situation, absolutely need secure borders, absolutely need to enforce the law. We can handle 5,000 or 4,000 or 2,000 people coming to our borders if we have to. But at the end of the day, we need a holistic immigration policy. The Senate passed one bipartisan in 2013. Senator Barrasso voted against it. It provided for 700 miles of border fencing, a lot more technology, and a lot more agents, and I don't know what his plan is.
Senator Barrasso, the next question is for you. What legislative efforts do you support to lower drug costs for people who live here in Wyoming?
Well, there are a number of things. Number one is I've just co-sponsored a bill that the President signed this past week to let people know the cheapest cost of drugs. This was done in a bipartisan way, had to do with Medicare as well as with other pharmaceuticals because there's been this gag order on pharmaceuticals. The President today has come out with another plan to help lower the cost of pharmaceuticals. As a doctor, I know that it matters how much drugs cost. I think it's very important for people to find affordable medication. And I support what the President has come out with as well, with making sure that all these ads that you see on television for drugs, you know, it's 5 companies that do more than half of all the advertising, and the average cost of those drugs runs from $500 a month to $11,000 a month. Why do you think they're advertising? Because they want people to go to their doctor and say, is this drug right for me? I remember practicing medicine and people say, is the purple pill right for me? Because there was a commercial, is the purple pill right for you? They wouldn't even tell you what the purple pill was for. So that, I think, has driven up the cost of drugs and the demand for the medications because of the advertising. And I agree with what the President has done in promoting to say when you're running those ads, you need to have on the ad the cost of the drug so people will know what they're asking for.
Mr. Trauner?
You know, I agree that advertising for prescription drugs kind of doesn't really make a heck of a lot of sense. If you don't have the expertise only doctors do, why can they advertise? So I'll agree with you on that one. But look, that's not the answer. When you've taken money from 34 big pharma PACs this election cycle, you're not going to try to lower drug prices for seniors or anybody else. There are some very specific answers that we can do. We can make sure that Medicare can negotiate drug prices with big drug companies just like the VA can. But Congress passed a law saying they couldn't do that, and I don't think there's one person in the state of Wyoming that actually wants that to be the case. We can talk about reimportation of drugs from foreign countries, and we can also make sure that generic companies have the ability to put generics in place, and that companies that have the patent on those drugs, when they expire, can't do like niggly little stuff to make sure that that patent extends for another 17 or 30 years. There's some very specific laws we need to pass, but certainly letting Medicare negotiate drug prices, number one.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, 2 things. One is that my opponent, when he was running for, I think, one of the previous races, he said that Medicare Part D, which has been wonderful for seniors, he said it was the worst piece of legislation ever passed in this country. I would think that patients and seniors on Medicare D will say he was absolutely wrong on that. And I will tell you, people contribute to campaigns. Campaigns are very expensive. I vote the Constitution, I vote my conscience, I vote my constituents, and that's always the way it's been for me in the state Senate and in the U.S. Senate.
Mr. Trauner, the next question is for you. What should baby boomers and millennials think about Medicare and Social Security?
I would hope they would think that it's going to be there for them when the time comes, right? Now, let's remember why Social Security and Medicare first came to being. Social Security came into place after the Great Depression because our parents and grandparents were homeless on the streets. And we as a country decided that wasn't something that we wanted. It wasn't appropriate, so we put in place a safety net. Same for Medicare. You know what? It turned out that insurance companies in the private sector couldn't affordably cover seniors because, frankly, they're a bad risk. They get sick and they're hard to cover. So we came up with Medicare to make sure that our parents and our grandparents didn't die prematurely because they didn't have access to affordable health care. Now, when it comes to baby boomers and the future, look, you know, it's interesting how I always hear that Mitch McConnell came out the other day and said that it's the main driver of our debt is Social Security and Medicare. That's just not true. Let's be clear about that. But it's interesting because we always want Social Security and Medicare to pay their way, somehow make money, but we don't do that with the military. We don't want the military to pay its way, or infrastructure, or our court system, or the court of law. That's not the role of government. Government isn't there to make money. Government is there to do collectively what we can't do individually. And certainly having a safety net for seniors and disability. And by the way, I have a sister-in-law who my brother passed away from a brain tumor at a young age. and my sister-in-law had a young 2-year-old, and you know what, if she didn't get survivors' widows benefits on Social Security, she would have been lost for a while. So we've got personal experience. I hope young people think it's going to be there, that they elect officials who will make sure it's there in the future.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, we need for people that are on those programs now to save them, to strengthen them, to simplify them in many ways. My mom, 96, in assisted living right now, on Social Security, on Medicare. The year she was born, life expectancy for a woman in America was 56. Now it's 81. When Lyndon Johnson passed Medicare, he said it was for the widows because all the men by age 65 were going to be dead. We got the medicine right. People are living much longer, healthier lives. We got the math all wrong. So we have these two tidal waves coming of the baby boomers coming at Social Security and Medicare, and at the same time, these are the financial structural stability, the pillars for our seniors who are on those programs. You need to have a bipartisan effort to deal with that. We tried to do that when President Obama was president. We need to continue to work toward that end because the future of this country and our economic stability depends upon it.
Mr. Trauner.
You know, it's interesting. While life expectancy has increased over the years, life expectancy for the very people that need Social Security benefits, working class people, has not gone up at all. So I don't think raising the age is the answer. Look, let's take a look at the cap on Social Security, right? I'm going to use really rough numbers, but at $100,000, the cap's around 120. But if you earn $100,000 a year, you pay about $3,000 into Social Security. If you earn $1 million a year, you pay about $3,000 into Social Security. If we just raise the cap a little bit, we can make it, solvent for the long haul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trauner. We'll change it up a little bit now. It's time for what we call the lightning round. Kristen and I will provide you with short phrased words, or a few words, maybe 1 or 2 words, and you'll have 20 seconds each to respond with no rebuttal.
Who's going first on this one, by the way?
Kristen will ask first for Senator Barrasso.
Okay.
Okay. Marijuana.
Some folks want it legalized. I do not. I assume the legislature in Wyoming will debate it this year and make their final decision. I'm against it.
Mr. Trauner.
Legalize, regulate, and tax medical marijuana, decriminalize from Schedule I, and make it a misdemeanor for people that use it otherwise recreationally.
The next lightning round question for Mr. Trauner.
Public lands.
Protect public lands, keep public lands in public hands. You know, Senator Barrasso was the chair of the platform committee in the Republican platform in 2016, and he said that the states should immediately sell the land, the federal government should immediately sell the land off to the states. I disagree.
Senator.
The platform committee said that. I didn't. I never have. There's not any legislation to do that in the Senate. The champion of this candidate right now is Elizabeth Warren, who has been fundraising for him, the darling of the liberal left, and she wants no energy development on public lands, which would kill Wyoming.
Senator Barrasso, pre-existing conditions.
My wife is a breast cancer survivor. She's had 3 surgeries. She's had chemotherapy twice. We need to protect people. I will tell you that as a husband. I will tell you that as a doctor. There's a way to do it without trapping people in Obamacare. People with pre-existing conditions need to be able to find insurance that is affordable and appropriate for them.
Mr. Trauner.
The Senate and Senator Barrasso voted repeatedly to gut the Affordable Care Act, to take away the individual mandate. You can't protect pre-existing conditions without having healthy people and sick people in the same pool. He has repeatedly tried to gut and get rid of pre-existing conditions, and to say otherwise is just not true.
Mr. Trauner, livable wage.
I'm totally for a living wage. You know what? Right now, we subsidize the private profits of Walmart and McDonald's and other big companies because people that work there full-time are still on government subsidies. That is wrong. We need to make sure that if you have a life, if you work hard and full-time, you can live a life of dignity and support yourself and your family.
Senator.
In Wyoming, under this economy, that it is a growing, strong, healthy economy, minimum wage has gone up, living wage, the amount of money that people can make now, signing bonuses, there are lots of opportunities. I don't think you need to legislate any of this.
Next lightning round question for Senator Barrasso from Kristen.
Race rhetoric.
I'm sorry.
Race rhetoric.
There's no place for it. We're the equality state, and it shouldn't be part of our society.
Mr. Trauner.
Yeah, you know, I think we agree on this one. It's awesome. No, absolutely. You know what? Look, there's no place for discrimination in our society against race or anybody else, and we need to make that, we nip that in the bud. Stop it cold.
Okay, Mr. Trauner. Campaign finance.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of campaign finance reform. We all know that, right? Senator Barrasso's taken money from over 500 corporate PACs. I haven't taken money from one corporate PAC. I've got way more small donors in Wyoming than he does, which amazes me. He's a U.S. Senator. We need to make sure that we get big money and corporate money out of politics.
Senator?
I would just point out that within the state of Wyoming, I have over close to 2,000 donors. He has about 200, so for every one person that's donated his campaign, 10 have donated to mine. The person that's moving small donors to him right now is Elizabeth Warren, who is endorsed him and is moving to try to get money funneled through Massachusetts and then sent to Wyoming in a way that they bundle money to go to candidates who have these liberal views.
No endorsement, by the way.
Senator Barrasso, the next one is for you. Saudi sanctions.
Absolutely should be done. I think what had happened in Turkey is absolutely wrong. I'm looking to see if we can actually get the connection between the Saudi prince and that. I think that that will be found. I call for sanctions. And the Senate, I'm one of the senators on the Foreign Relations Committee that's called into play the Magnitsky Act to do just that.
Mr. Trauner?
Heck yeah, we need to put sanctions on them. What they did is egregious. And I just want to make something clear from something Senator Barrasso said earlier about energy dominance. Oil is a worldwide commodity. So even if we're drilling the oil here, we're subject to the Saudi Arabians if we don't get off that.
Mr. Trauner? Dr. Christine Blasey Ford.
Look, I think she had nothing to gain. She came out and she made what I think were credible allegations. We needed to take a look at that. I don't know what the FBI report said because it's all secret. I don't know what anything else that they looked into was because they've all kept it secret. There's no transparency. I don't know what happened. I have absolutely no idea. I think she was credible, and I think why else would she come forward?
Senator Barrasso.
Well, I did read the FBI reports. I don't know what happened 35 years ago, but I know that there was nothing new found in the FBI reports. There was no corroborative evidence from anyone. There was nothing new in the reports.
Thank you both. We'll now resume regular questions in the debate. Kristen has the next question for Senator Barrasso.
President Trump has introduced a number of tariffs, effectively creating a trade war with nations like China. Do you feel his tactics have been effective? Who have they helped, and have they hurt anyone in Wyoming?
Well, I've told the president I disagree with the tariffs and the trade war. I've told him that personally. He knows where a number of the senators stand on that. Trade is very important for Wyoming. I'm much more of a free trader. I want it to be fair. I want it to be smart. We have products that we need to sell overseas. Our number one cash crop is beef. We have coal that I'm trying to get ports built in Washington State that we're now sending up through Canada. People want our coal in Taiwan, in Japan, in China. The governor was just in Taiwan. We've opened a trade office in Taiwan. We have natural gas, Trona. Opportunities abound for Wyoming to trade. I don't think the tariffs help. Does China cheat? Absolutely. So it's a double-edged sword. Does China kind of hijack our ability to work there? Do they steal our trade secrets? Absolutely. So I'm hoping what the president is able to accomplish is opening markets in ways we can sell more of our products abroad.
Mr. Trauner?
All right, first let's be clear. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives the power to deal with tariffs and trade to Congress, not to the president. They've abdicated their authority, and that's part of the problem. But you know what? My wife owns a small business, and she is getting letters. She just sent me 2 yesterday, emails, from vendors who are telling them that they're going to have to raise their prices due to the tariffs and the trade situation going on right now. There's always one sure loser in any trade fight, and that's the U.S. consumer, every single time. Look, the United States took the lead in the world order years ago to set up organizations like the WTO and other organizations to make sure that international trade was done fairly and that it was adjudicated properly. We need to use those organizations. We need bilateral discussions, absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, willy-nilly trade wars against, the second biggest economy in the world, not going to help anybody.
Senator?
Well, I'm a free trader. I want to sell our products overseas. I agree with the governor in going to Taiwan to open a trade office. We have great opportunities abroad, and I'm going to continue to fight for Wyoming products.
Okay. Mr. Trauner, we'll start with you for this one. The Wyoming Legislature's Joint Judiciary Committee has been examining proposals for a number of judicial reforms aimed at reducing the prison population and saving the state money. Do we, as a country, incarcerate too many people?
You bet we do. And I'll start with drugs. Right? So that's one of the reasons you want to decriminalize marijuana. People that are serving mandatory minimum sentence out there with a nonviolent offense for doing something that in their own home is absolutely wrong. Right? So that's number one. Look, there was a time back in the day when crime was rising, and we went to a period of mandatory sentences, mandatory minimum sentences with no discretion for judges, and that filled up our prisons with a lot of nonviolent offenders and offenders that could get out and be rehabilitated if we gave them the opportunity to do so, and we didn't have that opportunity. We need to find a way to make sure that we rehabilitate people. I think the private prison system is wrong. That's a role for government. It's not the role for private companies that want to just fill beds to get paid. That's part of the problem as well. You know, and I'm just going to go to one other thing, which is a little off, but with marijuana and incarcerating people, you know the people that should be incarcerated? It's the CEOs of opioid makers, drug companies, who are selling pills, 30 million pills into a pharmacy in West Virginia, with 3,000 people. They need to be held responsible and accountable too.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, actually, what the Wyoming decides in the state legislature, I'm not going to weigh in on. The United States Senate is looking at sentencing reforms. Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, called me on something that he's working on. I expect that he's going to bring that to the Senate for discussion, debate, perhaps a vote on the floor, amendments, and that'll be after the elections when we convene. So that'll be a discussion with regard to that. With regard to opioids, we've just passed major opioid legislation, bipartisan legislation. Republicans and Democrats coming together. The president signed it yesterday in the Oval Office. Very little press attention, no headlines, because it was people working together from both sides of the aisle to deal with a real problem, a legitimate problem that we all see the need to. But over 100 people die a day of opioid abuse. I'm a doctor. When you watch the Super Bowl and you see 3 ads for a complication, a side effect of opioids, opioid-induced constipation, you know, too much is being prescribed, too much is being used. Physicians were part of that in the beginning when they didn't realize the side effects. It is a national tragedy, and that's why we're focused in a bipartisan way on
Thank
it.
you, Senator. Mr. Trauner.
And I'm glad that you did pass that legislation. I think that's actually a great thing that we did, but it doesn't do one thing. It doesn't hold the ultimate people responsible and accountable. And until you do that, behavior won't change in a big, big way. But at the end of the day, we do incarcerate too many people. And frankly, there's some racial inequalities in that incarceration as well. We need to re-examine our system. There are state level and federal level things that need to be done, but we do need to re-examine it. You bet.
Next question for Senator Barrasso. Democrats are strongly favored but not certain to take control of the House. What does that mean to you?
Well, we're going to see what happens with the election of the House and the Senate, both in play. I'm going to continue to work with everyone I can on both sides of the aisle. You know, it's interesting. There was a story in the Casper paper the other day, and I brought it, and it says, "Study, a Wyoming delegation more bipartisan." And it talks about the fact that we work with people on both sides of the aisle. I'm going to continue to work with people in the best interest of the people of Wyoming. It's the way I've done things. I had an op-ed today in the Star Tribune along with Tom Carper, my colleague from Delaware, who's a Democrat senator who co-sponsored with me this Infrastructure Act. 99-1 passed the Senate. It passed the House unanimously. So you can work with people on both sides of the aisle when people realize that what you're trying to do, just like the Hathaway Scholarship that I did in the state Senate, it's best for all of the people, and it's what we did on opioids. So there's bipartisan work being done in the House and in the Senate, but it doesn't get the kind of attention that I think most elected officials wish it would.
Mr. Trauner.
Well, you know, what does it mean to me? I don't know. It means the voters are looking at their choices and deciding what they want to do. I mean, look, I can't worry too much about what's going on around the rest of the country. I have a tough enough race running against Senator Barrasso here myself. So all I can do is go out and meet the people of Wyoming the best that I can and give them a fair choice and let them know who I am and what I'm for and not necessarily what I'm against. I am for country before party. It's pretty clear in this country today that blind allegiance to party is really killing us and tearing us apart. And the Senate has gotten worse and worse under the leadership of Mitch McConnell in that regard. John Barrasso is part of that leadership. There certainly may be bills where he's working with other people on that, but on balance, we've become way more polarized in the Senate, and that needs to change.
Senator.
Well, I think that they're just not seeing the attention of the bills that are passed in a bipartisan way, and they will continue to come. I work with people on both sides of the aisle and will continue to do that. And when the president has Republicans and Democrats with him in the Oval Office signing legislation, it shows that we're actually doing things together. Now, to me, you know, you talk about the House going to the Democrat. I don't know what it's going to be like for Nancy Pelosi as the next Speaker of the House. She has a long history and tradition of being against so many of the things that I'm for. She wants to raise taxes again. She wants to get rid of the fossil fuels, and you know, one after another, and immigration as well.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trauner.
Yes.
10 years from now, what industries will most drive Wyoming's economy? As a congressman, Will it be a priority of yours to help the state diversify, and what can you do?
Oh man, I have been talking about diversification every place I go in our economy. Anyone who's seen me campaign knows that. So we are an energy state, we're a natural resource state. I think we always will be in some ways, but we need to make sure that while we continue doing what we do now responsibly, in terms of our conventional fuel sources, we need to look at the future. We can't stick our head in the sand when the rest of the world is moving in a different direction. So absolutely, we're going to continue to be an energy state and a natural resource state, but if we want to be a world leader in the energy economy of tomorrow and a world leader in the real economy of tomorrow, we need to diversify. They're not mutually exclusive. You can look at carbon fiber, carbon nanotechnologies, carbon capture and sequestration. There's things we can do there, but we need to look at other fuel sources. I'm going to add something else. We need to look at net neutrality and make sure that we have broadband all over the state of Wyoming for everybody, because we are geographically challenged in this state. We've got a lot of remote communities, and I visited them, and I've run an ISP. I started an internet service provider in the state of Wyoming and ran one for several years. And if we've got the ability to have access to the internet that levels the playing field with us all over the country and all over the world, in fact. And we've got businesses doing that right now. But if you've got 2 or 3 companies that control the pipes of the internet, that can decide who pays what and who gets to be competitive and who doesn't, that harms competition. It harms Wyoming. It harms our country.
Senator Barrasso.
Well, in terms of industries driving Wyoming, and you take a look at Sheridan with Vacutech bringing jobs here, the new gun manufacturer coming to town, lots of things are going to come in terms of diversifying economy, but energy is still what pays the bill. Oil and gas is our bread and butter in Wyoming. And with regard to coal, I think the future really goes to what we're going to be able to do and discover at the Integrated Test Center in Gillette, working with the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, making carbon profitable. We've had bipartisan legislation. I work with Sheldon Whitehouse, one of the most liberal Democrats in the Senate. We have passed a Future Act, and we've gotten through that's signed into law, and a Use It Act to capture carbon dioxide, work with the research that is being done on that so that we can deal with the issues of the climate, the issues of the carbon, all of the issues affecting the world. I think that Wyoming, our future is so bright because of what we're going to be able to discover through invention, the X Prizes, the money that's being put into those kind of inventions. Wyoming's going to lead the way in that.
Senator, Mr. Trotter.
I agree. The Integrated Test Center, the Advanced Carbon Products Innovation Center up in Gillette are great things, and we need to keep doing those things. But again, we can't stick our head in the sand. Look, the free market, it's pretty hard to fight the free market over the long haul. And the market is telling us that over time the world is going in a different direction. We just need to make sure we're ready for that and that we do diversify in our energy sources. We keep our Trona going. We keep exporting that. We have net neutrality. And we look in each town what works for each town best, because what works in Sheridan doesn't necessarily work that well in Laramie or in Jackson or in Rock Springs and Green River. That's what we got to check out.
Thank you very much. Kristen?
Hey, Senator Barrasso, we'll start with you. School districts across the state are discussing ways to secure the safety of their students. Does Congress play a role in that conversation, and if so, what is it?
Well, Congress plays a role in terms of making sure the funding is available to harden the schools, to make the schools safer, all of those things. But it's a local decision as to what a school district ultimately does. I was at Tongue River School in this county, talking to students there, been to the middle school, the grade schools here. As I talk to students, they have that same question they want to know. The local school districts are going to make that decision on the best way to use resources, but I think the federal government has a role, and we've actually passed legislation to put more resources into the hands of the local schools to do specifically that, to keep our schools safe. When parents take I have 3 kids, when parents take their kids to school, they should feel that that child's going to be safe at that school and is going to return home safely that evening.
Mr. Trotter?
So I was a school board member and the chair of the school board in my local community for several years, so I have a pretty good idea of how education works, what I think we need to do. Look, there is a role for Congress, but I do agree with Senator Barrasso that education tends to be more of a local thing. I've talked to folks down in Uinta County who actually were looking at putting guns in schools with teachers. Frankly, that's not something I think makes a heck of a lot of sense, but they are trying their best with good intentions to try and figure it out, and I just hope they're thinking it all through, because I do think in many ways it's a local level decision. But, from the congressional side, it's oversight, right? And we need to have oversight of federal education. We need to have oversight of the Department of Education. You've got someone right now who's running the Department of Education who doesn't believe in public education. To me, that's incredible and mind-boggling. So the Senate's role is to make sure that they're overseeing the department, to make sure that we are looking at schools, what they need, and supporting public education over private education.
Senator?
Well, as we believe, it's a local control issue. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Trauner, for Wyomingites who work full-time, should healthcare be a right?
Answer, done. I think that we should make sure that every single person in this country has access to basic quality, affordable health care. End of story, right? Every other Western country has done that, and we can do it too. I was the COO of a hospital for several years. I know how our system works. It's actually not really a system. It's kind of broken because we have everything. We have the VA, which is socialized medicine. We have Canadian health-style healthcare, which is Medicare. We have what France and Germany do, which is the Blue Cross system of nonprofits. And we have what nobody else has, which are for-profit insurers that have huge overhead and administrative costs that don't go to actually treating patients, but go to CEO salaries and making sure that they can deny claims. There was a study done just the other day that showed in Medicare Advantage, 75% of claims over the period 2014 to 2016 were improperly denied when they were viewed by their own companies who changed their mind. So we need to get rid of that incentive. We need to make sure that we spread the risk of insurance over the biggest pool possible. That's every single American should be covered. We need to make sure that we standardize. My hospital had about 150 or so contracts for insurance. That's crazy for a small regional hospital in Wyoming. And we need to make sure that we can protect pre-existing conditions, but you can't do that unless you have a pool that has healthy people and sick people, and it's broad enough to shoulder the risk.
Senator Brasso.
Well, I think it's a right and a responsibility. I want to make sure people can get insurance that is affordable and appropriate for them. Obamacare is very harmful to the people of Wyoming. We had thousands and thousands of people here, farmers, ranchers, I hear from them all the time, who had insurance that worked for them and they could afford. And when Obamacare became law, they weren't allowed to buy those policies anymore. I think President Obama called them junk, but it was good for those people and it was affordable and appropriate for their families. We need to get back to the people, to allowing people to buy what works for them and they can afford. Some of the things that we're trying to do with these short-term plans, I've legislation on that to go up to 3 years. It's only a quarter of the price of the Obamacare policies. And it's just a choice. People can have a choice. They can want to stay on Obamacare. Fine. I think the individual mandate was terrible. My opponent has just said several times he supported the individual mandate that made people buy insurance or pay a fine in Wyoming over 3 years. We've had, and I have the numbers here, 47,000 fines were paid in Wyoming, $24 million because of an individual mandate, which I think was absolutely wrong, and I'm glad we repealed.
Mr. Trauner.
Every single person in this country is going to need access to health care at some point or other. You don't think that when you're 18 or 19 years old, but believe me, when you get older, for both of us, I'm sure that's true. Look, the Senate had 7 years since the Affordable Care Act to decide what to do, and they put together a committee of 13 white men, no women, and they tried to gut pre-existing conditions and take health care away from an additional 20 million people. That's not the way to do it. The reason Affordable Care Act doesn't work well in Wyoming is because the Senate and the House have destabilized it by getting rid of the individual mandate and trying to gut the act, and that doesn't work.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. Kristen?
Okay. Senator Brasso, listening to national discussions, it seems many people are angry. How will you restore faith in our nation's government institutions, and what policies can you help put in place to help do that?
Well, I work every day focused on the people of Wyoming, focused on what the needs are, and people are our jobs, our economy, our future, education opportunities for our kids, and future opportunities for our state, making a positive difference for the people of Wyoming. And I think there's a lot of issues around the country where people have lost faith in a number of institutions, some religious, some business, certainly government. What I continue to do is work in bipartisan way, passing legislation that I think helps all people, and I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to continue to work with people on both sides of the aisle on bipartisan legislation. The label about country before party, it's something that I have worked on with carbon capture. It's something I've worked with water infrastructure. We've 15 wonderful projects for Wyoming in the water infrastructure bill that the president just signed the other day. I mean, he gives you a pen when he signs the bill. This is it. This is the sign of the bipartisanship of getting things done that help people at home. The opioid legislation, if I wasn't going to be here today, I would have been there for the signing of that legislation yesterday in Washington. There are things we're doing to try to help the American people live better, healthier lives, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Mr. Trauner.
Yeah, people are angry, you bet. And they're angry because things generally aren't working for them, for the regular person, the hardworking person. And look, why is that? It's because the people that run our country right now have two goals. They want to redistribute wealth upwards to large corporations and wealthy heirs and wealthy billionaires, and they want to push risk downwards. So you're responsible for health care, student loans, no more fixed pensions, and ripping up the safety net. That's a recipe for disaster. We need to make sure that career politicians and political pundits who want to scare us and divide us don't get away with that, because it keeps them in power. It works for them. And we need to make sure that we work going forward. We tell people what we're for. We put country before party, and we get away from this fear and division and rhetoric and name-calling and some of the things that our moderators have talked about tonight, because it's ripping our country apart.
Mr. Brasso?
Well, redistribution of wealth was actually President Obama's plan and goal for America, and he spoke openly about it. Economic growth is President Trump and my plan for America. I want to grow the economy, grow jobs. The Democrats' approach on this so often is grow government. I mean, there's a fundamental difference. I want to lower taxes. I want to make the tax cuts permanent. I see others who want to raise taxes, roll back the tax relief that the American people have had, and they're keeping more money in their own pockets to save and to spend. I think that anger is related to anxiety. Once we can make some of these tax cuts permanent, that can relieve some of the anxiety.
Thank you, Senator. Gentlemen, this will be the final question before closing statements. Mr. Trauner, is arms control or an arms race the goal of the United States withdrawal from the landmark Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia? And how will withdrawing impact our allies in Europe?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the Senate has the power to make treaties, so that's up to the Senate to decide whether they want to withdraw or not. That's important. But you know what? Look, when it comes to nuclear weapons and the potential for planetary annihilation, I think we're better off staying in agreements and making sure we work with our adversaries and our allies to do everything we can to take away increased risk of a mistake and an accident that could have lasting repercussions for the human race in perpetuity. So I'm not a fan of withdrawing from agreements like that. We've worked painstakingly over the years, from the beginning of the Soviet Union all the way through Russia, to make sure we've got agreements in place. You know, I'm not privy to whether they're abrogating the treaty or not. I don't know that for sure, because I don't have that information. But certainly we can make sure that we talk with people and work with them to get it done. And we need to make sure that we keep our allies secure. And one of the ways to do that is make sure we're working with our allies, not destroying NATO, not trying to destroy the world order that we set up 70 years ago and which has worked well and kept us away from another world war. We need to make sure that we don't throw that away willy-nilly just because we want to show our strength and power and try to dominate others, right? We need to be for America first, but at the same time, we need to make sure we work with other countries to make sure that they are safe. And I don't think pulling out of those agreements is a smart thing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. Senator Brasso.
If we want to be safe and secure at home, you need peace and stability around the world. My opponent mentioned the fact that it's the Senate that makes treaties, but it wasn't the Senate, it was the UN and President Obama that did the Iran treaty, which I thought was terrible. With regard to Russia, what we now know is that they have been cheating for years on this treaty. And I think if you want to deter somebody's action, Vladimir Putin, he's cunning, he's opportunistic, he's aggressive. He is someone who doesn't respond to words, he responds to action. And if you want to deter somebody, you have to have the capacity to do it, and we have that capacity. You have to have the commitment to do it, and President Trump has shown that determination and the commitment, and you have to be willing to communicate that. So I think that what we have seen in terms of world global activities, when President Obama drew a red line in Syria, it was crossed and turned into a green light. I think you need to have a forceful leader who will actually say something, be committed to it, and let the other world leaders know he's very serious about it.
Mr. Trauner.
So, I don't think that we've really been as strong as we have with Vladimir Putin when it comes to Russian interference in our elections and our democracy. And that's something that, for whatever reason, the Senate and the House and those folks haven't really been appropriating money to secure our election system. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And I want to just talk about Iran for a second, right? So if we're going to abrogate the treaty with Iran, we just give Iran the opportunity to have no oversight, no inspectors, and they can just build nuclear weapons whenever they want. So to me, engaging is better than not.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. It's time for closing statements, and due to our agreement before the debate, we'll go in reverse order. Mr. Trauner, you'll go first.
All right, give me 1 second, if that's okay, before the timer starts. Look, we all know D.C.'s a mess. Folks up there never take personal responsibility. They always blame the other side. My opponent will tell you that he's with the president, but let me tell you what the president actually ran on. He ran on lower drug prices, a $1 trillion infrastructure program, better health care for everyone, the wealthy paying their fair share, protecting Social Security and Medicare, and draining the swamp, including term limits. I'm for every single one of those things, every single one. My opponent, John Barrasso, isn't for any of them, none. If he was, why are Wyoming seniors still paying more than they should for their drugs? And why do hedge fund managers in New York City on Wall Street still pay lower tax rates than Wyoming teachers, miners, and ranchers? I'll tell you it's because the senator has taken money from over 500 corporate PACs this cycle. Look, people are angry. I do get it. Wyoming voted for the president because even though they know he wasn't perfect, they wanted to shake things up in a big way. John's been there for 10 years, and he's not going to change a darn thing going forward. He counts on one thing to stay in office: party label, something George Washington did warn us about in his farewell address in 1796. And if we don't start looking at people instead of label, nothing's going to change. So it's time for something different. It's time for Wyoming to regain its voice. I'm just a regular guy whose kids push me to do this because they can see the peril in their future. And you know what I'm about. I'm about country before party, families in the forefront, leadership, and integrity. We all know that if you've been in Washington too long, you become one of them, bought and paid for. Not me, I never will be. Fear-mongering, blind allegiance to party, and fostering division don't solve a darn thing. If we can come together, we can keep shaking it up. Thank you, Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Trauner. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thank you. And since he mentioned me, I would say he led the march against President Trump at a rally on the first anniversary of President Trump's inauguration in Casper. And he's actually been to New York with the hedge fund managers, taking money from them, and in Martha's Vineyard with the Democrat PACs. But I am here today to thank you for the opportunity, my wife and I, for the privilege of representing Wyoming in the United States Senate. Elections are about choices. And the question is, are you better off now than you were a couple of years ago, when the Republicans took power and President Trump came into office? And for Wyoming and the country, we are much better off. We are because we have cut taxes. People have more money in their own pockets. We've gutted regulations so that it makes it a lot easier and people have freedom. We brought jobs back to Wyoming. I was at a school yesterday in Laramie, and a kid said, "What's the job of a senator?" And I said, "It's to protect and promote Wyoming, our jobs, our economy, our environment, our places, our people, our values, our resources, and our freedom." And thank you to the men and women who wear the uniform, or the veterans who have kept us free. My wife's dad, Bob, 92, World War II vet, Korean vet. My dad, World War II vet, he's not with us anymore. He used to say from the time I was a boy, "John, you should thank God every day you live in America." Tonight, I'm asking for your vote to continue to be a forceful, effective, conservative voice for Wyoming, and to make sure that our country remains safe and strong and free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Kristen?
Candidates, thank you very much for attending tonight's debate. We want to remind Wyoming voters to get to the polls on General Election Day, which is Tuesday, November 6th. Our sincere thanks to members of the Sheridan Press staff for serving as our debate timekeepers tonight, and to the administration and staff of Sheridan College for being such gracious hosts. Thank you also to the staff and crew of Wyoming PBS for partnering to provide this service to our statewide electorate.
Candidates, I also want to express my thanks to you tonight, and thank you to Kristen for the support of Sheridan Press in organizing tonight's debate. Just one final reminder, viewers can watch this debate again on our homepage at wyomingpbs.org. Thank you, too, to the audience here this evening, and thank you all to our viewers across Wyoming and across the country who tuned in. Have a good evening.
Thank you.